See when you're on mute, by the way. I'm not sure if you realize by now.
Oh, no wonder nobody's laughing.
We're missing all your jokes.
Yeah, that's bad. It was all good stuff.
Dick.
All right. Thanks for joining. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about Microsoft's recent purchase of Xamarin and
Wait, what?
that means for enterprise mobility. Here with us today, we have Propelics partner Eric Carlson. And
Hi, Steven.
We have mobile strategists Nitin Bhatia, Glenn Gruber, and integration architect Tyler Jensen.
Hi there.
All right. Now I just got to do this little intro here.
Hello and welcome to Device Squad, the Propelics Enterprise Mobility Podcast. Device Squad, fighting crimes against enterprise mobility around the world. Bad UI, frustrating user experiences, poorly conceived mobile strategies, we defeat them all.
This podcast series will cover all aspects of enterprise mobility, including strategy, development, design, testing, and more. My name is Steve Brykman. I'm a mobile strategist and UX architect with Propelics. First, a brief history of the company. Founded in 2011, Propelics is a mobile strategy consultancy helping enterprises worldwide devise true mobile strategies and develop world-class mobile applications across all industry verticals. Propelics clients include large companies such as Amway, Bright Horizons, Bank of Montreal, Dubai Airports, Family Dollar, DLL, Cintas, Merck, and many more. Propelics' menu of services includes 8 different mobile kickstarts, covering everything from mobile strategy and road mapping to MCOE, to UI UX design, to mobile testing, along with soup to nuts app design, development, and support. Additionally, Propelics offers 3 homegrown enterprise mobile products. Ben, so you were the one who pushed for this podcast conversation roundtable. So why don't you start off? Tell us, why is this Microsoft purchase important? Why should we care? What's the big deal?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a couple of layers to this. Obviously, Microsoft has under Nadella has said that mobile and the cloud are key tentpoles to how they want to grow the business going forward. And this is obviously another big step in terms of trying to make that happen. I mean, there was a lot of work, obviously, on Windows 10, from a device and operating system perspective. But there's always been the challenge to get the developer community engaged in building apps for Windows 10 devices, but also just building apps on platforms controlled by Microsoft. And they have been relatively unsuccessful in that regard, other than when they've given incentives to certain companies to try and build versions of their apps on the Windows platform. I think that now there's always been a lot of talk because of the fact that Xamarin has been based on C#, that it's a natural fit to be acquired by Microsoft at some point. But now that they have a platform that can leverage a lot of, a large community of developers with C# skills, but also allow them to use those to continue to build for the dominant mobile platforms of iOS and Android. This helps support really more from a developer and platform perspective. In my view, probably more than anything else, it might have a residual effect of making it easier for more people to want to start developing for Windows using that set of tools. But we'll have to see about that going forward. I think that's another part of the conversation.
Yeah, this is Eric. I think it's interesting because even as the role of the operating system, even the role of like Windows 10 becomes less and less important. And as more and more individuals are using mobile devices, and since Microsoft really hasn't claimed any significant portion, like you said, of that mobile device, that footprint, their role, right, and becoming more of a services cloud-based company, as you said, and being able to obviously own the server side of the house and being able to be more of a processor, and then being as really a development lead in the industry. I think it's pretty interesting to move away from building for Windows only to being able to be a development and in a services and cloud-based firm that can deliver across really any platform, right? And I know that like from a Windows 10 perspective, and you're kind of competing with OS X, giving those operating systems away for free. And you have, are people still willing to pay $99 a year for a new operating system for a Windows PC? I think that market is kind of disappearing. I think it's just interesting to be less of a, that they need to own the whole stack and become obviously somebody who can deliver from a development and cloud-based service perspective across really any end user computing device.
Yeah, I think the timing is really interesting. Just a month ago or so, Microsoft CEO, admitted that the Windows market was so small as to be unsustainable. I think the figure was 1.7% in the third quarter of 2015. Do you think that Microsoft is going to abandon Windows Mobile and pursue this software-based direction? Or how do you think this relates to the failure of Windows Mobile?
I don't think they'll. I don't think they'll abandon it. In fact, what I feel the purchase of Xamarin would do is further incentivize the developers to build for Mobile 10. So their whole idea is, hey, you're building it for iOS, and it takes 20% additional work. So if we think about this whole ecosystem, it's got three different players, right? It's a three-sided ecosystem. There's Microsoft sitting on one side, there's developers sitting on the other side, and then there's the consumer sitting on the other side. And consumers are going to try and purchase devices that have the most apps. Developers are going to try to build for operating systems that have the maximum amount of exposure, and manufacturers obviously want kind of a piece of that. So I think the Xamarin kind of fits in right in the middle of that, to where now they can go back to the developers and say, well, you've maximized your exposure, and just 20% more might get you into a Windows store, which may then incentivize consumers to possibly, if that's not the only thing, but that is a good thing to, if you've got more apps in your app store, then it might be one more thing to why people may want to buy your phones.
Right. Even from a developer perspective, same type of three-legged stool, right? You have developers that are really Java focused. So you have, obviously building for Eclipse and building native Android apps. You have a significant amount of developers that are Objective-C / maybe now growing Swift type developers with that under their belt. And you have this giant .NET and C# development community, like Glenn mentioned before, that now this purchase gives total legitimacy to. And Xamarin existed before, right? But it wasn't from Microsoft. And so now I have a platform that is not going anywhere, that enables a huge development population to be able to deliver apps on 3 or 4 major architectures, which really is not available in, obviously, an Objective-C Swift perspective, and it's clearly not available in a Java perspective the way that is here. And then you have, I guess, a fourth piece. You have like the JavaScript tools, which is something like Accelerator or other types of tools that allow you to do that. But I don't even think that knowledge base, when it comes to mobile developers and those skill sets, are even close to, say, a .NET, or C# development environment or community of developers. That are just a huge door opens, I think, for that skill set. Yeah,
that space has matured over the last 10 years. Visual Basic, when they decided to move away from Visual Basic.NET to C#.NET and have that as their primary language for the compilers and stuff like that. So that definitely, now looking at kind of the .NET frameworks that have been around for a good 7, 8, maybe even more years, putting mobile on top of such a solid framework versus looking at some of these new JavaScript libraries that are almost immature compared to the maturity of the .NET framework. I think even from a stability perspective, I would like to think that we may have better mobile apps that are easier to develop, that are easier to debug, that are easier to do a lot of things just from a developer perspective.
I think it's a very interesting play for Microsoft in that, of course, as was mentioned, their revenue streams for operating systems are diminishing significantly. Their revenue streams for their commercial software systems, such as databases, enterprise systems, etc., those are still fairly strong. Their commercial licensing revenue is about 56 or 57% of their total revenue. right now, and that will continue. Their operating system revenue will continue to go down. I wouldn't be surprised in the future if you see Windows Server even operating system licenses down at virtually zero cost or very low cost. And
Right.
one of Microsoft's strategies, I think, here since Satya Nadella came in, is that he does not like Steve Ballmer. He does not have this sort of monopolistic view of the operating system being the key to controlling the world, and instead has enabled people like Scott Guthrie, who heads the server development division, to really embrace all developers. And that's when Azure started putting Linux available into Azure, etc. And that embracing of that whole developer community and bringing in developers from every platform and embracing them and providing them with the greatest tools and the greatest support for the tools allows Microsoft to get this great big huge infrastructure of developers building software that relies on and utilizes all of those back-end enterprise systems, where I think the majority of their profits are going to come from in the future, rather than the desktop apps, the desktop operating systems, etc. You're going to see a lot of, and even now, I have a friend that works with Microsoft. Even now, their licensing structures for desktop operating systems for enterprises with large numbers, it's extraordinarily inexpensive to put Windows on the desktop, which is why they're still quite dominant in the enterprise marketplace. Not so much in, because obviously PC sales are going down for homes and consumers. People just don't want that big box sitting underneath their table in their dining room. But those PCs are still being deployed, even sometimes in virtual scenarios in the enterprise. And that enterprise game, I think, is where Microsoft sees their future. And by grabbing all of the developers that they have and enabling them to build mobile apps using the same tools, the same language, some of the same testing tools that they've been using, etc., and the Visual Studio development environment, which hands down is honestly the best development environment available and the best supported. Now there are people who will argue that, but I'll argue strongly that it really is the best IDE available, and has really great support. So I think that they've been trying to work this deal with Xamarin for a long time, because Xamarin provides them with that strategic piece that they have not owned before. And it also strengthens Xamarin's play, because those who have kind of looked at Xamarin as a small startup and not really enterprise ready are not going to be able to make that argument, at least not for much longer.
Right. Even Visual Studio out for OS X, and knowing that obviously Xamarin has an OS X IDE as well, you can kind of see that clearly there's going to be a multi-platform development environment and the extension of Visual Studio to other platforms. I mean, even the fact that there's Visual Studio that runs on Linux is clearly a step where that dependency of being a full stack Microsoft kind of platform is obviously not important to Microsoft, right?
And one thing I would say, I mean, Tyler, like those are all really, really good points. But the other part of this that I think can be critical is, now, again, that focus on the developer and focusing on all the supporting environment rather than the desktop OS probably bodes pretty well for your continued focus on Intune, in the EMM space. And, because now they can really bring all of the plumbing together for the IT organizations to develop on. Who cares what the device platform is almost anymore? We can develop on it. We can support it and manage all those different devices. So I think it does dovetail very well with what they're trying to do to catch up from a feature perspective with Intune to the mobile irons and AirWatches of the world. But I think that this just further supports that story too, and their focus on the enterprise.
Yeah, I think they're mostly realists there. I think they realize they're not going to capture the mobile device market. They're not going to sell, several billion Windows Phone devices. That's just simply not going to happen. There'll be a really small number of devices and some enterprises that deploy some of the devices, like the new HP device that's coming out, that that bills itself as a mobile desktop machine. There may be a few people that purchase that, but like you're saying, Glenn, the real win for them, I believe, is going to be in capturing and locking down that enterprise market, so that they can continue to sell, database server licenses, the CRM and other Dynamics licenses that they have, which are extraordinarily profitable. Even SharePoint is an extraordinarily profitable piece of software. Even for those of us who love to hate it, there are enterprises that rely very heavily on that product, and the licensing for that brings Microsoft a significant amount of revenue.
I don't know what anyone else thinks, but I'll throw this out. Does the Surface Pros and the the Lumia phone hardware, do these become kind of like a vanity project for Microsoft? If this is not, if you think about the effort involved in building and developing and supporting hardware, it's one thing where you look at Google's Nexus as kind of their vanity project to create the reference architectures for other OEMs, but no one else is really picking up on Windows as a phone. None of the other OEMs are really picking up on Windows 10 as a smartphone platform. And if, frankly, if you're the enterprise, and, why would you want to focus that much on investing in building, applications for a Surface, Pro, which has one set of UI concepts, when, if you're looking at a mobile device strategy, all of your smartphone devices are going to be either iOS or Android, or at least the, great majority, at least into the foreseeable future, are going to be that way, that use completely different UI paradigms. This almost weakens the hand for this Microsoft developer community to want to continue to support and build products for mobile devices from Microsoft, now that they can use that skill to build on devices that people already have.
Yeah, I don't know if Microsoft will ever really be a successful hardware system maker and seller. Right now, their revenue model is almost 80% software, and 20% other stuff, and that 20% other stuff is probably 99% Xbox in terms of revenue. They may continue to build the devices. I don't know if they'll ever make money on those. I think that their larger play here with Xamarin is to continue building their enterprise software dominance and being able to sell into that market. Even the recent news of Microsoft allowing and setting up Oracle within Azure is pretty big news. Those two organizations have been diametrically opposed to one another, and in some respects, and competed with one another in the database marketplace. But it kind of shows, I think, such a difference in direction and purpose in trying to really push the Azure platform, the back-end systems, the enterprise systems. That's where they're going to continue to make their bread and butter. And I think that they have their sales organizations and development and support organizations directed at that market. They are I don't think they'll ever be successful in the consumer market that we, at least the market that we see, and especially not in the hardware device market. I just don't see that happening.
And I'm just wondering, how do you think this is going to affect Apple and Swift use?
I don't know how it will affect them. I do know that I've heard from a number of friends who are .NET developers. I've grown up in the .NET infrastructure ecosystem, essentially, and there are a number of individuals that I know that are in the .NET stack. They are super excited about the Xamarin acquisition because it allows them, and hopefully it gives them, access to the tools in the platform without having to spend the inordinate price that Xamarin has charged. While it's not the most expensive cross-platform mobile app development system out there, it's almost the most expensive. And most small developers, especially if they're going to try to do it on their own, they just really can't afford those tools. And in Microsoft shops, they're price sensitive. So even the enterprises have been, I think, a little bit hesitant to invest in those tools. And so because of that, you haven't seen Xamarin penetrate the .NET development market like it really should. And for example, Xamarin claims to have 1.3 million developers, while estimates are there's anywhere from 8 to 15 million .NET developers in total. So that's, they've got essentially 1/10 of that number. If they can double that or triple that or quadruple that and all of those .NET developers start adopting that platform and start building mobile apps, that could be transformative in terms of just developers and mindshare around building mobile apps, both for iOS and Android, regardless of what happens with the Windows 10 mobile platform.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the consumer side of this. I don't know if that's really the Microsoft play here. I mean, being able to pick up those developers, and I could see that being a little bit of a motivation. It has to seem from me that this is 100% an enterprise mobility play, right? The idea that picking up the ability in Xamarin to be able to allow .NET C# developers to develop for iOS and Android in the public app store, I guess using Azure services and things like that is clearly a benefit and a portion of that. But I would think that also having the ability to kind of work towards the idea of having almost a responsive native application type of program where I could develop for any screen size across multiple platforms to say, I'm going to allow an enterprise developer to build an application that does X, Y, and Z, and then they can run that on a Windows 10 device, or I could run that in an iOS device off the same code base with different UI off the same IDE. That I could see as being a huge area, and obviously using the Azure platform, and you have the MBAS capabilities of that and everything else, right? And then like you said, Glenn, in terms of the manageability of that, you start bringing in security pieces, and now you have a single platform to deliver. Before, obviously 5-7 years ago, you had a single platform from an IDE perspective to deliver anything on a Microsoft platform. Now I'm looking towards building an IDE and a platform that I can deliver applications really across almost any end computing device. Regardless of who built the hardware or what OS is on there. And I think that I can see is a pretty good vision. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know who else is in a position to even do that right now.
I don't know either. Xamarin got a really good jump start on that with their Xamarin Forms, which essentially, even when Xamarin started, you could build a lot of code that was shared, but the code for specific UIs, iOS and Android, had to be separated. And Xamarin Forms creates a sort of a native control set that converts and compiles to use native controls. So you get a native look and feel, because it is generating native controls through this Xamarin Form. So it allows they claim, and I've seen a few examples of 80 to 90% shared UI code, which is pretty transformative. And if they can continue that, if Microsoft continues to do that, and they expand that so that you can get a build for iOS, Android, and Windows 10 with very little to no differences in your code for the UI side, that's very transformative. And I don't know if there's anyone in the marketplace besides Microsoft, like you said, that has the ability to throw the resources at that problem and make that problem solvable, because that is an extraordinarily difficult problem to solve, as we all know, as we see the difficulties and challenges in building apps that should act and behave in exactly the same way across different native platforms. It just is very challenging to do that.
Now, given that, it'll probably never work.
It may not. It might always be.
It's a good idea, but I mean, when we do workshops, obviously we talk a lot about that. Obviously, I'm trying to build an experience on a specific device, and usually that experience should not be the same, and would not be the same based on where I'm using that device or the context of that use, or the business process and everything else, right? And the whole, that kind of goes against our whole kind of Propelics philosophy of not treating mobile as a separate screen, right? That it should be something that is fitting a business and a use case, and we're hopefully trying to simplify processes and all this type of stuff. So, which was kind of our whole thing around when Microsoft was doing it on the Windows 10 side, to say I can use the same code base and I can build it for Windows Phone and tablets, and we always, or for a Windows PC, and we always said, well, that's fine. Like, it's nice from a technology perspective, but are we actually executing the use case? Are we solving problems? Are we making life simpler and all that type of stuff? And so that is not necessarily a challenge of the technology so much. It's just a challenge of kind of giving control to technology teams to say, hey, we're mobile ready, when all we're really doing is creating awful UI on small screens. But that, again, that's not Microsoft's issue. That's really the implementation of those.
Yeah, it's very possible that could be the end result of that effort. No doubt about it.
Yeah. So do you think we'll see like a watering down as a result of this across platforms, where everybody will start to look the same, all these apps will start to look the same, and they'll all start to suffer as a result?
I'm not sure, this is Glenn, I'm not sure that we will, only because you're seeing such distinct, I don't want to say personalities, but I'll say personalities. You know, when you look at the UI conventions for how things live in iOS versus, you know, Android with material design and how they're continuing to evolve that, and then, you know, the very different UI style guide. I still always think that it's, you know, it'll be taken poorly by whoever's using which OS if you present an app that doesn't seem to fit in the rest of the surroundings. So I do think that, you know, you may see more of it. I just don't think it'll be well received by the user, you know, if you do.
Yeah, and keep in mind, even with Xamarin and probably other plays in the same space, the Xamarin Forms quote unquote shared native control system or infrastructure is not required. You don't have to use that in order to use Xamarin. You can still build the separate individual unique UI and have those individual distinct experiences. So like Eric said, it's really going to be up to the development teams. There may be some teams that attempt to use the Xamarin Forms for enterprise apps and get a good enough is enough kind of thing. And having worked for large enterprises, building internal software for use by employees, I can tell you that is often perfectly fine. And some of the very worst pieces of software ever built are internal enterprise apps, as you well know. And we probably all had to eat that dog food at one point or another. So there is very much a cost benefit scenario there, and a lot of enterprises will go for that easy, lower cost, lower hanging fruit kind of thing, and you'll get a lot of enterprise apps that probably look like crap and get the job done, and nobody who's paying the bills is going to really care about that.
Right.
With respect to consumer apps and native, experiences, that is a whole different story, because as soon as you start releasing those apps to the world, you're going to get a whole different picture in terms of feedback, etc., and what looks good and what doesn't. And if it looks like crap, your app is going to get killed in the marketplace, and nobody's going to adopt it.
The other thing, just away from the Xamarin platform itself, which we've talked mostly about, is just Microsoft picking up the insights and the test cloud stuff. I don't think, at least I don't know, I don't remember Microsoft having anything similar to a mobile test cloud like what Amazon did with the device farm, or like a Perfecto Mobile, or the types of things. I thought Microsoft was like a partner with Perfecto or something like that, but that is a huge purchase as well.
Yeah.
The test clouds, it's growing. I know it's still a little bit new, but it growing in terms of its capabilities. It's well written. I think that is a huge win for them to be able to extend that out and be able to turn that into a much larger test-based system, and also in insights. I don't believe Microsoft had anything related to real-time analytics of app usage, other types of things, where that was more partnership-based as well. And now that's in-house. Across obviously all these platforms and everything else, like those are also just really good additions that they're picking up as part of this as well.
Agreed.
How do you guys think that this bodes for competitors like Appcelerator?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like that, my first thought was that, Accelerator was bought last month. This month we're seeing Xamarin, and Coney is kind of like the cheese stands alone. Like, I'm not even sure that there's anyone to buy them at this point. And now instead of being a really good platform that's one of 3 smaller startup-y platforms on par, now I'm not sure where they go, and it could be challenging for them.
I think it's challenging for Appcelerator as well. I mean, I know we talked a lot about I don't think anybody saw Xamarin going somewhere else besides Microsoft, right? I mean, we've talked about this for years, and I think they made a strategic investment last year. Xamarin raised, I think, 54 million round C last year, and I thought they maybe had a round D, if I remember. But we kind of, it really made sense. Like that was their one true exit. Axway coming out of nowhere with Appcelerator was a little bit surprising to us, right? I mean, we weren't sure exactly where they're going to go, but I don't think Axway was on our list of potentials. But they have some, I think, market positioning challenges now. I think with this purchase and with a strong development and developer base on the .NET C# side, you have the world's largest or second largest cloud-based hosting and MBAS provider now behind this. You have a significant amount of dollars for marketing and for growing this. You have the integration with Visual Studio. Like you're working against a pretty long line of deficiencies when you're writing your own IDE, right, or writing your own wrapping libraries and all those other types of things where you're competing against Microsoft and the Microsoft development team, who can typically will be larger, will work faster, and other types of things. And especially when you talk about Test Cloud and you have this analytics on top of it, and you start looking at wrapping EMM and other types of things. It's gone from which we've always seen as an enterprise. I'm looking to build a platform of 6 or 7 providers, and maybe 2 years ago that was 6 or 7 providers. Maybe now in 2016 it's 3 or 4 providers, and soon with this you're looking at 1. I think you're in a tough spot, in at least working in large enterprise businesses, where you're not having to prove to say, is my JavaScript-based development team, is that enough of a differentiator for me to be able to pick Appcelerator / Axway versus not?
I was going to say, if you want to stay with JavaScript, you have other choices now too. IBM and Adobe, via which are JavaScript based and also come from large companies that have other components that are going to make sense for your business.
Yeah, of course. I think it's definitely different. It's just that whole early industry piecemeal type of approach, right? I got to go find a testing package, and I need to go do something around monitoring, and I need, I'm thinking about MBAS and what am I going to do there, and is there an easy choice, right? And what do our clients typically do? They work towards areas of low risk, right? And that's one of the major pieces is trying to determine where do I have a position where I can keep my risk low, but still have, and low in terms of being a little bit future proof, low in terms of being able to find resources, right, who know that skill set, low in terms of being able to have assurances that when challenges come up, there's a team there to be able to solve those. And it's not that Microsoft is the best in any of those cases. Don't get me wrong. There's a history and baggage in each of those, but still, it's low risk turns into simple solutions sometimes, and that might not be the right one for our customers, and also might not be the right one for Axway, Appcelerator, and Coney, and other groups.
Well, there are many enterprises out there, many organizations that already have blanket services agreements with Microsoft and discounts negotiated, et cetera. And if they can ease this product into the organization vis-a-vis those relationships without having to go through the entire sell cycle, it does give them a leg up over some of the competition. I think we're going to find a lot more about what Microsoft's position and vision is for Xamarin in 2 events coming up: Build at the end of March, and the Xamarin Evolve event in Orlando at the end of April. Build is already sold out. I mean, you can get on a waiting list if you want to go to Build in San Francisco, but if we really want to learn more about Xamarin and how Microsoft is really going to transform it or push it, or what they're going to do with it, it may be a good idea for us to send a representative there to the event in Orlando.
Yeah, I think to Tyler's point, a lot of organizations already have Microsoft technology, already have Microsoft skill set. For those organizations, it'd be an easy sell. Like Microsoft could very easily go in and say, we're not changing anything here. We're just adding to it, and very seamlessly be able to acquire customers. And also, going back to the point that was earlier mentioned, I really feel that the $1,000 a year per developer per seat is going to go away. I think Microsoft is going to either make it kind of $99, just like Apple does, and compete in that manner, so that they can get a lot more companies get comfortable with their platform, and even lower the cost for other developers, who are initially finding this to be ridiculously expensive.
What effect do you guys think this is going to have on enterprise mobility as a whole? Like, do you think that companies that have so far been holding out on maybe making the leap into mobility will be encouraged to do so by this acquisition?
I believe initially they will be encouraged to do it. I believe that when they actually start, biting into the apple and finding out that enterprise mobility is as difficult and challenging as it can be, there may be some who meet with some discouragement, and that probably spells opportunity for companies like ours to help them through that and help them overcome some of those hurdles. I don't know if it will transform the enterprise landscape into a whole bunch of companies that all of a sudden now are doing mobile and doing it well. I think that we see, and we from Propelics point of view have seen that just getting a good tool set and running out and starting to build software is not necessarily a good mobile strategy, and hence we spend a lot of time with our customers and talking about their mobile strategy and actually determining what is good and what is not in terms of what their efforts are going to be. And I don't see this play really changing that aspect of it. In fact, it might make that aspect of it even more difficult for some enterprises because they may be an assumption that, hey, it's going to be easy as throwing together some Windows Forms apps or some simple ASP.NET web apps, and then when they find out that it's still difficult and challenging, and there are still all of the things that have to be solved, and all of the challenges that we help our customers through, all of those challenges still exist with or without Xamarin. So it could spell opportunity for us, actually, I think.
Yeah, the only thing else we were thinking about earlier was, are there organizations out there that have been primarily building hybrid applications because they haven't really had a good IDE that matches to their team skill sets? And so do we have situations where we've had a lot more container wrapping apps, or we've had more web applications built where we have a kind of MS-driven, Microsoft-driven team. We want to be able to do some enterprise mobility, but we're not going to retrain them, or we're not Xamarin customers today. And would that allow them to move away from, kind of web hybrid apps more towards native applications now that that skill set is being brought under a, native Microsoft stack type of idea? So I'm not sure. We obviously talked to a lot of people about native versus hybrid versus web type applications, and the resources, the skill set and the ID definitely plays a role, or the development environment clearly plays a role in some part of that decision, but maybe not the entire decision.
Well, I think we're just about out of time here, guys. Any final comments?
Let's go to Orlando and learn more.
All right, let's do that, Eric.
Florida? No, I think wrapping up, I'm not sure if this is there's no bad, I don't see really a downside to this from a Microsoft perspective. I think it's something that, like we said, we expected a while ago, and it seems to be an extremely wise purchase. I think it's good from the Microsoft development community and those types of things. I think it is a step forward for an enterprise mobility perspective, like we talked about, and I think it does change the landscape a bit when it comes to looking at MEDPs, for sure. And I think it's going to be interesting to see kind of where this goes. It makes me have a lot more clarity in terms of Microsoft's kind of approach and strategy going forward as an organization. You start looking at the steps that are being taken, like the re-platforming of Visual Studio and the Xamarin purchase, other types of things, and what we talked about earlier in terms of moving away from the OS. So it's gonna be fun to watch, and it's gonna be I think it's good. It's a good thing for our clients too. It's a good option for large enterprise businesses, and it brings some gravity to the enterprise mobile space.
Yeah, I think in the past where Xamarin was not on the table in a lot of conversations when we were talking to our customers, even though their in-house skill sets were .NET, there wasn't a strong tool out there or a tool that we could confidently recommend. I think now that conversation definitely has changed a bit.
Yep.
Agreed. Well, thanks a lot, guys. Once again, Microsoft purchase of Xamarin helping to bring increased legitimacy to enterprise mobility on the whole, and making enterprise mobility even more of an enriched space. All right. Well, thanks, Eric, Glenn, Nitin, and Tyler for hopping on for this roundtable discussion. And thanks, everyone, for tuning in. And stay tuned for the next episode of Device Squad, the Propelics Enterprise Mobility Podcast. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.